All right. Well, it is 6:30, so we are going to get started. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Holidays Unwrapped with Dr. Bill Thierfelder. My name is Beth. I'm the adult programming librarian for the Mid-Continent Public Libraries. So welcome, everybody. We do have a few housekeeping items. We are recording this evening's program. I will send out that link to the recording once it is available on our YouTube channel. Um, and because we're recording it, we are going to ask folks to remain muted and type any questions that you might have in the chat so that we can get good sound on the recording. We will save time at the end for questions. And I'm also going to drop in the chat the link for the survey for this evening's program. So if you can take a few minutes at the end of the program to fill that out and let us know how we did, that allows us to continue to get funding for programs like these and helps us to also pick upcoming program topics. So keep those suggestions coming. I do want to share some upcoming programs with you. So give me a moment here to share my screen. So hopefully you are seeing my screen now. Uh, and the first program that I want to mention, we've chosen to kick off our Winter Reading Challenge, which runs January through March 15th. And that theme this year is Endless Journey. So it's all about exploration. So we've got Films of Adventure and Discovery, Part 1. And that is at 6:30 on January 7th on Zoom. But Frank Mendoza will be back, and he will be sharing films that highlight the themes of new lands and people exploring new worlds. So Goonies, Space Camp, The Martian, The Labyrinth, Back to the Future, among others, will be discussed. Then on January 12th at 6:30, photographer Regina Daniels is going to be doing a hybrid program for us. So if you're local and you want to attend in person at our Lee's Summit branch, you can, or you can join us on Zoom. But she takes photos of abandoned locations. So she'll be sharing sites and their history from Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Iowa, and Illinois. Then on January 13th, we are going to head to Greece with Gene Flynn for an armchair travel program, Greece Old and New. And he'll explore the Minoans and then their contributions to Western civilization, and then move on to looking at Greece in the 19th and 20th centuries as the country achieved its independence. And then on January 17th at 2 p.m., we have another hybrid program. This one will be in person at our Midwest Genealogy Center and also on Zoom, and that's at 2 p.m. This time we're going to explore the trails and the California Gold Rush. David Jackson, a local historian, will be sharing the Gold Rush letters and diary of James and David Lee Campbell. um, and following them on their journey from Missouri west to California in 1850. So you'll have to come to the program to find out if they struck it rich in the gold rush. And then on February 25th, Dr. Thierfelder will be back with us with African American space explorers as part of our Black History Month series. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and turn it over to Dr. Thierfelder so that he can get started with this evening's program.
Very good. And you should be seeing now my Holidays Unwrapped full screen.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, hello and welcome everyone to Learning from Home, and welcome to the Mid-Continent Public Library's profile of the Holidays Unwrapped. My name is Dr. Bill Thierfelder, and I'll be your host this evening. Now, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a retired professor of arts and humanities and a docent emeritus from the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. I live now in Portland, Oregon, and that's where I'm speaking to you from this evening. And here I am an artist, writer, and lecturer. Now, since we can't cover everything about this evening's topic in one presentation, I'd like to invite you to take a deeper dive on my website, which is makingwings.net. And in this case, it's deeper dive number 50. So that's one word, making wings, and it's .net. And I want to make sure that we are sharing here. You'll be brought to my homepage. And if you go to the hamburger menu in the upper left corner, which you should be seeing now, you're going to see a drop down. Please feel free to visit any of these, especially the lecture schedule if you're interested in some of my other presentations. For tonight, we're going to go to this first batch of deeper dives. You're going to click on the arrow, not the words, but the arrow. And these are all programs that I have given or will be giving in the near future. Again, please feel free to visit any of them. But tonight, we're number 50, Holidays Unwrapped. And when you go to that page, you will find some recommended media. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. If you don't have a paper and pencil handy, you can always go to my website and copy down that information. I have printed resources as well as video resources, and then separate sections about the four major December holidays, the solstice, Hanukkah, Christmas, and Kwanzaa. And for any of these, all you have to do is just do a click. So like winter solstice, if you click on this, you'll be brought to the page. In this case, it's a Wikipedia article. When you're done, you click it off and you're back on my page. So it's kind of one-stop shopping. So I hope that you can take advantage of that. Well, I'd like to say that everything that you're going to hear in this evening's program uses the web resources and the books that you just saw on my website. But for this presentation, I especially use the following to build its structure and its script. The History Channel, Chabad.org, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and vetted articles in Wikipedia and Britannica. Now, one of the things I just pointed out on my website was suggested media. So I do suggest the following books as excellent places to start your exploration. Dorothy Morrison's Yule is a great introduction to the history of pagan celebrations of the winter solstice. Diane Ashton's Hanukkah in America traces the roots of the festival from biblical times to the present, focusing especially on how Jewish Americans created a viable alternative to Christmas celebrations. Stephen Nissenbaum's award-winning The Battle for Christmas traces the long and winding road of Christian nativity celebrations. And Keith May's book, Kwanzaa, is a fascinating study that's subtitled Black Power and the Making of the African American Holiday Tradition. So, four really good places to start. So, with all of that said, let's begin. And the first of our holidays is a winter festival for most of us, but also a warm weather event in the Southern Hemisphere. Hence, the two different costumeries that you see on your slide. All of today's holidays, starting with the solstice, have at their core the concept of light, the light of the sun, the miraculous light of the temple in Jerusalem, the light of the world in the Christian tradition, and the light of solidarity during Kwanzaa. Now, to get us started, here's an upbeat quote from Dorothy Morrison's book, Yule. The winter holidays provide us with a time for reflection, resolution, and renewal, a time for gift giving, goodwill, and kindness. Most important, though, they provide us with rituals to celebrate the balance of light and dark, rituals for welcoming the healing powers of warmth back into our world, and that give us a common ground that draws us together as people. Now, as we will see, especially with Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, the road to quote unquote shared experience or common ground, well, that's quite complex. So let's bookmark that idea and move on with that first winter holiday that we're exploring, the winter solstice. Turns out that the celebration of the solstice is one of the oldest winter celebrations in the world. It's on or around December 21st in the Northern Hemisphere, but around June 21st in the Southern Hemisphere. Because most of the Earth's land masses and populations are in the Northern Hemisphere, the tendency is to think of the winter solstice as a cold weather event. Now, prehistoric humans, Homo sapiens, Homo denisovans, and Homo neanderthalensis, they were hunters and then gatherers. Homo sapiens, our group, the last surviving group of hominins, eventually became farmers. Now, all of these early human species acknowledged the importance of the sun, but we have definitive proof that early Homo sapiens definitely reverenced and even worshipped the sun. The winter solstice became a way for prehistoric peoples to live out the hope of Percy Shelley's famous line, "If winter comes, can spring be far behind?" Now, this is especially important in the far north, where it's pitch black for a couple of months. The harvest has been brought in, and now there's hope for a new planting season. Now, some of the first recorded winter solstice festivals happened around 3000 BCE in Egypt. There was an extravagant 12-day celebration honoring rebirth of the sun god Horus. The 12 days represented the 12 months of the Egyptian calendar. Buildings were decorated with greenery, especially palm branches with 12 fronds. Palm branches put out one shoot per month, so the 12 fronded branch formed a representation of the entire birth, death, and rebirth of the sun. Well, by 2300 BCE, we get to the Babylonians, who celebrated Zagmuk, another 12-day festival in which the sun god Marduk battles with monsters to regain his realm. People would pray for Marduk's success on the first 5 days before the solstice. And when he did achieve victory on the solstice, indicated by the fact that the sun stayed a few minutes longer the day after, well, there were parades and feasts and even gift exchanges. Now, moving forward, we get to around 600 BCE following forward, and we get to the Persians. Now, Persian is the modern day Iran, celebrating, celebrating the Sakeya, which is a 12-day festival as well. So, getting this idea, a lot of 12-day festivals here. And of course, when we get to Christmas, what do we have? The 12 days of Christmas, right? It's 12, very important number to we Homo sapiens. Its focus was the order of the world thrown into chaos and then back into order again. Slaves and masters exchanged places. A mock king was crowned. Law and order flew out the window. Grudges and debts were forgiven, if only temporarily. And by the end of the festival, when the sun was back in control, figuratively, and giving more and more light each day, well, order was restored. So it was a very happy fellowship and happy celebration. So this holiday chaos tradition would become part of festivals everywhere in the Middle East and eventually in Europe as well, as we're going to see a little later on. Well, by 480 BCE and following forward, we come to the Greeks. The Greek solstice depicts the triumph of light as Zeus defeats Kronos and the Titans and restores order after, you got it, 12 days of battle. One interesting aspect of the Greek festival were the dangerous imps called Kalakantzaroi. They roamed the land, often stealing the spirits of unsuspecting children, especially those born during the festival. Now, this is very similar to the imp character of Krampus in Central European cultures. In ancient Greece, new babies were wrapped with garlic bundles, and because imps and monsters supposedly couldn't tolerate fire and smoke, each family kept a large log burning for the duration of the festival. Now, some of these symbolic gestures would reappear much later, certainly in Western culture. Garlic became a way to ward off demons and vampires, and the burning log would find its way into the mythologies and folk tales of Europe, and more of that Yule log in a little moment. Well, by 250 BCE, the ancient Romans also began holding a festival to celebrate the rebirth of the year. What eventually became known as Saturnalia ran for 7 days, from the 17th of December to the 24th. So it's one of the first that's not 12. Now, as we saw with the Persian solstice festivals, it was a time when ordinary rules were turned upside down, time of frivolity and debauchery. Men, for example, dressed as women, and masters sometimes dressed as servants. The festival also involved decorating houses with greenery, lighting candles, holding processions, and definitely giving presents. Now, by 200 and forward of the Common Era, we know through art and oral tradition that Norsemen of Northern Europe saw the sun as a wheel that changed the seasons. And it was from the word for this wheel, Houl, Hyul, that the word Yule, Y-U-L-E, is thought to have come. During this winter solstice gathering, the Norsemen lit bonfires, told stories, and drank sweet ale. Now, Before we get to the Druids, I'd like to say a word about mistletoe. Mistletoe is a small evergreen shrub that is semi-parasitic. It lives on other plants. It doesn't grow on the ground. It grows on plants. So it's kind of like an air plant. And it draws their nutrients from the branches of those trees. Now, the picture in the upper right of your screen illustrates this relationship. Now, as the illustration on the left shows, the Druids, they were Celtic priests who practiced from around 300 BCE to 200 of the Common Era. Well, they would cut the mistletoe that grew on oak trees and they would give it as a blessing. And oaks themselves were sacred, and the winter fruit of the mistletoe was a symbol of life in the dark winter months. So you can thank the Druids and the Celts for the whole mistletoe idea. It was also the Druids who continued the tradition in Europe of the Yule log. The Celts thought that the sun stood still for, we're back to 12 again, for 12 days in the middle of winter. And note, again, the Druid celebration is another, as I said, it's another 12-day event, denoting the complete annual cycle from solstice to solstice. Well, why don't we head south? And let's celebrate Inti Raymi, the Incan Empire at its height between 1400 and 1500 of the Common Era, paid homage to the sun god Inti in a winter solstice celebration called Inti Raymi. Now, in Peru, like the rest of the southern hemisphere, the winter solstice takes place in June. The Incas fasted for 3 days before the solstice. Before dawn on the day of the solstice, they went to a ceremonial plaza and waited for the sunrise. When it appeared, they crouched down before it, offering golden cups of a sacred beer made from fermented corn. Animals, including llamas, were sacrificed during the ceremony, and the Incas used a mirror to focus the sun's rays and kindle fires. Now, after the Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire in 1533, the Spaniards banned the Inti Raymi holiday, but it was revived in the 20th century with mock sacrifices, and it continues today. And the pictures that you see on your screen are from current festivals of Inti Raymi in Peru today. Well, heading back up to the northern hemisphere and back to December calendar, we go to China to celebrate Dongxi. The Chinese celebration of the winter solstice, which began in prehistoric times, welcomes the return of longer days and an increase in positive energy in the new year to come. The celebration may have begun as a harvest festival when farmers and fishermen took time off to celebrate with their families. Beginning with the Han Dynasty around 200 BCE, the holiday grew in importance. And by the 12th century of the Common Era, emperors officially prescribed it as a day to worship and sacrifice to their gods and to the ancestors. Today, it remains an occasion for families to gather to celebrate the past year and to share good wishes for the year to come. The most traditional food for this celebration in southern China are the glutinous rice balls known as tang yuan, often brightly colored and cooked in sweet or savory broth. Northern Chinese enjoy plain or meat-stuffed dumplings, a particularly warming and nourishing food for a midwinter celebration. Well, let's return to the Middle East for a moment, and this time it's back to Iran. Remember the Persians before. Now we're in Iran, And Yalda Night is an Iranian festival celebrating the longest and darkest night of the year. The celebration springs out of ancient Zoroastrian traditions and various customs intended to protect people from evil spirits during the long night. On Shabi Lada, which translates to night of birth, Iranians all over the world celebrate the triumph of the sun god Mithra over darkness. According to tradition, people gather to protect each other from evil, burn fires to light their way through the darkness, and perform charitable acts. And while we're on the topic of Muslim countries, you may be wondering why I don't mention any Muslim feast days for December. Well, that's because Islam operates on a lunar calendar, which means specific important celebrations like Ramadan, for example, shift by about 11 days with each subsequent year. And that means that celebrations generally occur about a week and a half earlier than they did the year before. So that's why Ramadan is celebrated in various months during the year, and that's all because of the calendar. But this Shabi Lada is a solstice, a winter solstice festival. And that's pretty much always celebrated in December. Well, how about North America and its indigenous peoples? Well, on the left, we look at the Zuni, one of the Native American Pueblo peoples in western New Mexico. For them, the winter solstice signifies the beginning of the year. It's marked with a ceremonial dance called shalako. Now, in the center of your screen, we see the Hopi in northern Arizona. They celebrate the winter solstice with soil, when the sun chief announces the setting of the sun on the solstice. An all-night ceremony then begins, includes kindling fires, dancing, and sometimes gift-giving. And one of those gifts might be a Kachina doll, and you see them in the lower right of your screen. Now, for those of us like me who live in the Pacific Northwest, the Syilx, the Okanagan people of Washington State and British Columbia, well, they celebrate the winter solstice with ceremonies that include prayers for the new year to come. There are also prayers for the so-called four chiefs: berries, roots, four-legged animals like deer, and fish. And finally, there are prayers for families, and there are also songs, winter dances, feasting, and gift-giving. These events are held during the evening and can go on all night. Some dance ceremonies, like those that you see on your screen, can last up to 10 days in a row. Note, by the way, the magnificent Hamatsa masks depicting the monster bird known as Hakhakwa. Well, from the winter solstice, we move on to another great holiday festival, Hanukkah, which, by the way, has several different spellings, and none are wrong. In Hanukkah in America, Diane Ashton says on page 14, celebrating Hanukkah each year, Jews acknowledge boundaries between themselves and Christian society. But by touting Hanukkah's fit with the values of the Christmas season and of American culture, they insist on their right to be different, because underneath, people are all the same. Moreover, by elaborating on their own religious festival that commemorates a miracle, Jews also refute secular trends in America that diminish religion's importance. So while it appears at first glance that Hanukkah elaborations are all about Jews fitting into America, closer analysis suggests that Hanukkah is the vehicle through which Jews draw distinctions between themselves and the majority society, while asserting their common humanity. Now, we're going to revisit this tension between wanting to be part of a society and wanting to be individuals within a prevailing majority when we look at Kwanzaa. For now, let's just bookmark this quote for later and remember that what we say about today's celebration of Hanukkah is primarily a very American thing. Now, in a nutshell, here's the Hanukkah story for those who aren't familiar. In 200 BCE, King Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire took control of Judea, incorporating it into his kingdom. His was one of the empires that succeeded the conquest of Alexander the Great. He promised the Jews respect for their ancestral religion and customs, and the Jews lived quite peacefully under his imperial power for over 2 decades. But in 175 BCE, Antiochus's successor, King Antiochus IV, invaded Judea and began an all-out assault on Jewish culture and religion, trying to force his own Greek Hellenistic culture on the Jews in the same way that he was trying to do that in other parts of his empire. Well, the Jews revolted under the leadership of the Maccabees. The name comes from the Hebrew word for hammer, and hammer was the nickname of Judas, one of the early leaders of the revolt. By 165 BCE, the Jews had defeated the Seleucid army and taken possession of that portion of Jerusalem where the temple was located, the central symbol of Jewish religion and culture. Now, before we describe the rest of the story of Hanukkah, I'd like to look at first at a few definitions. Now, myths are a way of explaining the unexplainable. They're an early form of science that generally originates in upper or priestly classes and cultures. Almost always, classical myths begin as oral stories. In other words, they weren't originally written down. Then we have folklore and fairy tales. Well, they originate with the common class. They are meant to be instructional, moral, or entertaining. They, too, often begin with oral tellings before they're written down at a later date. And finally, you have legends. Now, these are stories based in some part on actual history, but they usually exaggerate for effect and importance. And like myths and folktales, legends are usually told first orally and then written down later. So, using this basic paradigm, Hanukkah is deeply rooted in legend. Why? Because there is absolutely a clear historic foundation. But certain elements, such as miracles, have both mythic and folkloric roots. So, Hanukkah is a Jewish legend with folkloric elements that's recounted in the Talmud, in the books of Maccabees 1 and 2, and even in the Gospel of St. John in the New Testament. Jesus, we have to remember, was an observant Jew, and the Gospel of John talks about how he celebrated Hanukkah during the winter. The Talmud in the books of the Maccabees recount that upon their victory in 165 BCE, the Jews wanted to relight the sacred lamp in the temple that had been desecrated by Antiochus, but found only enough oil for one night. Miraculously, however, that little bit of oil lasted 8 nights. And this legend becomes the basis for celebrating Hanukkah, which means rededication, over 8 days. Now, because the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, makes no mention of Hanukkah, well, for nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish religion placed much more importance on holidays such as Passover and Rosh Hashanah. Yet, because Hanukkah usually occurs in December, around Christmas time, as well as winter break, when people of many religions are celebrating the season, Jews living in the United States in the early 20th century began placing more importance on the holiday. Today, Jews around the world have followed suit, and Hanukkah is more important than it once was. Hanukkah has its own set of customary foods. To celebrate the holiday, Jews fry foods in oil to acknowledge the miracle of the oil. And they may eat potato pancakes and jelly donuts and noodle or potato casseroles. At Hanukkah, kids play with dreidels, which are small spinning tops. Tradition says that before the Maccabees revolted, Jews, because of the edicts of Antiochus IV, weren't legally allowed to read the Torah, so they would study the holy text while pretending to gamble with spinning dreidels. This part of the story is a good example of blending folkloric elements with the historic legendary aspects of the Hanukkah tradition. Antiochus is a real person in history, but the origin of the dreidel, well, that may be rooted in folklore. Regardless, each of the four sides of a dreidel has a Hebrew character: Nun, Gimel, He, or Shin. The four letters are said to stand for the Hebrew phrase Nes Gadal Chayam Sham, meaning a great miracle happened there, which refers, of course, to the miraculous, long-lasting oil in the temple. Another tradition is giving children gelt, G-E-L-T, gelt. Gelt is both a Hebrew and a Yiddish word for money, and closely related to the German word for gold or money. Now, for those of you who may not know or need a little refresher, Yiddish is an amalgam of Hebrew, Aramaic, and ninth century Germanic and Slavic dialects. It was spoken in Eastern Europe and throughout Russia and the Ukraine, eventually being brought to America in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by millions of immigrants. Traditionally, Jews celebrated Hanukkah by giving their kids and relatives gelt, money, rather than wrapped presents. But because holiday gift giving plays a big role for both Christians and many secular people, many Jews in America and elsewhere now give and receive Hanukkah presents instead of money. However, to acknowledge the tradition, many Jews, and I would probably say most Jews that I know, also give children gelt in the form of little chocolate coins wrapped in gold or silver foil, as seen on your screen. Well, let's move on to Christmas. And certainly with a photo that definitely idealizes the holiday experience. It's right out of a Hallmark movie. Now, here's a quote to get us started. For the real subject of this book is not so much Christmas itself as what Christmas can tell us about broader historical questions. In writing about the commercialization of Christmas, for example, or the way Christmas made children the center of attention and affection, I have always tried to remember that those changes were expressions of the same forces that were transforming American culture as a whole. But it has been equally important for me also to see Christmas as one of those very forces, as a cause as well as an effect, an instrument of change as well as an indicator and mirror of change. From that angle, Christmas itself played a role in bringing both the consumer revolution and the domestic revolution that created the modern family. In other words, as American culture changed, so did Christmas celebrations. Yet Christmas celebrations in themselves became one of the causes for those very changes in American culture. One fed off the other. Well, in the early years of Christianity, Easter was the main holiday. The birth of Jesus was not really celebrated until at least the 300s. It was then, in the 4th century of the Common Era, that church officials decided to institute the birth of Jesus as a holy day. Now, because the Bible doesn't mention an actual birth date or time of year, Pope Julius I, who reigned from 337 to his death in 352, chose December 25th, most likely to adapt and absorb the traditions of the pagan Saturnalia festival of the Roman Empire, which still existed at the time. And we spoke about Saturnalia a little bit earlier. Remember, the fall of the Roman Empire doesn't happen until the mid 400s. So when Pope Julius chooses December 25th, he is still operating the Catholic Church from within the Roman Empire, where the Saturnalia was still a very important holiday. First called the Feast of the Nativity, the custom spread to Egypt by 432, and then we have evidence of it being in England by the end of the 6th century. By the end of the 8th century, Christmas was celebrated in North Africa, the Middle East, portions of Russia, and through most of Europe. Indeed, by the late 700s, the celebration of Christmas had spread all the way up into Scandinavia. Now, in addition, from medieval times to the present, all Christian denominations celebrate the Epiphany, or Three Kings Day, which happens 12 days after Christmas on January the 6th, hence the concept of the 12 days of Christmas. On that 12th day, January the 6th, it is believed that the three wise men finally found Jesus in the manger after a long journey from undetermined regions in the east, east of Nazareth. In many countries, this is the day that gifts are exchanged, and not on Christmas Day. So, by holding Christmas at the same time as traditional winter solstice festivals, early church leaders increased the chances that Christmas would be popularly embraced. Well, by the Middle Ages, believers attended religious services in church, but then celebrated raucously in drunken carnival-like atmosphere, not unlike Mardi Gras. Again, a holdover from the pagan festivals like Saturnalia. And each Christmas in medieval Europe, just as it had been done during solstice festivals in ancient Greece, Rome, and Persia, a beggar or a student would be crowned the Lord of Misrule, and eager celebrants played the part of his subjects. The poor would go to the houses of the rich and ask for their best food and drink. Oh, if owners failed to comply, their visitors would most likely terrorize them with mischief. As a result, Christmas became the time of year when those terrorized upper classes could repay their real or imagined debt to society by entertaining less fortunate citizens. So it's kind of the whole beginning of charity work. Now, in the early 17th century, a wave of religious reform changed the way Christmas was celebrated in Europe. In England, for example, when Oliver Cromwell and his Puritan forces took over England in 1645, they vowed to rid England of decadence, and as part of their effort, they canceled Christmas. The Pilgrims, who were separatists from the Church of England, came to America in 1620. They were even more orthodox in their Puritan beliefs than Cromwell. And as a result, Christmas was not a holiday in much of early America. In fact, from 1659 until 1681, the celebration of Christmas was actually outlawed in cities like Boston. And anyone exhibiting the Christmas spirit was actually fined 5 shillings. Well, by the late 18th century, a further blow came after the American Revolution, when English customs like Christmas fell out of favor. Christmas is an English thing, so we're Americans now. We're not going to celebrate. Well, let's move forward. By the time we get to the early 19th century, the early 1800s, rioting by the disenchanted classes often occurred during the Christmas season. In 1828, the New York City Council instituted the city's first police force in response to a Christmas riot. So there's an interesting piece of trivia, right? The New York City Police Department can trace at least part of its roots back to Christmas. Now, this mayhem catalyzed certain members of the upper classes to begin to change the way Christmas was celebrated in America. Americans began to embrace Christmas as a family-centered day of peace and nostalgia. Now, part of the impetus for change happened when, in 1819, Washington Irving published 5 delightful holiday stories about a fictional celebration of Christmas and an equally fictional English manor house in his first famous book called The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon. That book, by the way, also has Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle in it. But he has 5 these Christmas stories. And the sketches feature a squire who invites the local peasants into his home for the holiday. In contrast to the problems faced in American society, the two groups in that fictional British manor house mingled effortlessly in peaceful, warm-hearted holiday that crosses lines of wealth and social status. So, despite its historical inaccuracies, the Christmas stories of Irving almost single-handedly changed perceptions about Christmas in America. Simply put, Irving invented fictional traditions that soon became rooted in the American society, in American psyche, such as, having a big feast on Christmas Day. Well, what Irving started in America, well, Charles Dickens reinforced and amplified in England when he published A Christmas Carol in 1843. That story's message, the importance of charity and goodwill towards all humankind, that struck a powerful chord in England and America and showed members of Victorian society on both sides of the pond that the benefits of celebrating the holiday. Christmas provided families with a day when they could lavish attention and gifts on their children without appearing to spoil them. Americans began to embrace decorating trees, sending holiday cards, having feasts, giving to charities, and gift giving as the true spirit of the season. Of course, now, when we think of Christmas, many of us also think about that fellow in the red suit, the one and only Santa Claus. Well, the legend of Santa Claus can be traced back to a real-life monk named Saint Nicholas, who was born in Turkey, what is modern-day Turkey, around the year 280 of the Common Era. The real Saint Nicholas gave away his inherited wealth and traveled the countryside helping the poor and sick, becoming known as the protector of children and sailors. I have more about the history of St. Nicholas on my website if you'd like to find out more. Well, St. Nicholas first entered American popular culture in the 1600s in colonial New Amsterdam, which is now New York, when Dutch families gathered to honor Sint Niklaas, or Sinterklaas for short. And Santa Claus draws his name from that abbreviation. Then in 1822, the Episcopalian minister Clement Clark Moore created the iconic image of St. Nicholas when he wrote An Account of a Visit from St. Nicholas, more popularly known today by its first line, "'Twas the night before Christmas." After that, the version of Santa Claus as a jolly man in a red with a white beard and a sack of toys was immortalized in 1881 when political cartoonist Thomas Nast drew on Moore's poem to create the image of old Saint Nick that we know today. And you can see that very first illustration from 1881 in the upper left of your screen. Then, in the 1930s, artist Hayden Sundblom finalized the Santa that we know today with his absolutely iconic Coca-Cola ads. By the way, the red color of Santa's clothing comes from the bishop's robes that were worn by the original St. Nicholas. So Santa Claus is a great example of a legend. In this case, a person who is rooted in history, but who's been amplified through folklore. So I can literally say, yes, Virginia, there is and there was a Santa Claus. Now, what I've put up on your screen here is this fun list here. It's some fun facts. You can go down the list with me. Each year, 30 to 35 million real Christmas trees are sold in the United States. Christmas was declared a federal holiday in the United States on June the 26th of 1870. The first eggnog made in the United States was consumed by Captain John Smith's 1607 Jamestown settlement. Poinsettia plants are named after Joel R. Poinsett, an American ambassador to Mexico who brought the red and green plant from Mexico to America in 1828. The Salvation Army has been sending Santa Claus-clad donation collectors into the streets since the 1890s. Rudolph, the most famous reindeer of all, was the product of Robert L. May's imagination in 1939. The copywriter wrote a poem about the reindeer to help attract customers to the Montgomery Ward department store. He wrote the poem, and then it was put into pamphlet form, illustrated, and it was handed out to customers at Montgomery Ward that year. And of course, the rest, as they say, is history. And finally, if you look there on the left of your screen, construction workers started the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree tradition in 1931. And unlike the very glamorous, gorgeous tree that you see today, that was the first Rockefeller Center Christmas tree. 1931, height of the Depression, right in the middle of the construction project as they were building the buildings. By the way, something that I learned in putting this program together, that there were actually some banks in the 19th century here in America that actually issued holiday money, and it was indeed legal tender. So kind of like one-off St. Nicholas money. I love it. Well, last but not least, we have Kwanzaa. Now, before I read a quote from Keith May's book about Kwanzaa that I recommended, we need to remind ourselves of this famous passage spoken by Frederick Douglass, the great African-American abolitionist, at a 4th of July event in 1852. And he said this: "What have I or those I represent to do with your national independence? I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not me. The 4th of July is yours, not mine. You rejoice. I must mourn." Okay, with that in mind, maybe we can now better appreciate this quote from the Keith Mays book. Indeed, the entire Black holiday tradition can be seen as an alternative tradition to mainstream American observances. But some Black holidays rooted in the 19th century have become more about Black incorporation into the mainstream American calendar and bringing African Americans as a people into the fold of American citizenship. Other Black holidays have sought to move African Americans away from mainstream American observances. If the Black freedom struggle has exhibited this propensity, oftentimes wanting to be in and sometimes desiring to be out, then the Black holiday tradition, at least in its Black power phase, was no different. To speak of a Black protest calendar is not only to acknowledge and take seriously what Frederick Douglass had to say about American mainstream holidays, but to understand deeply how African Americans use the calendar to perennialize their struggle and annually politicize themselves into existence. So, of course, what Mays says about Kwanzaa is reminiscent of what we heard Ashton say earlier in this program about Hanukkah in America, isn't it? On the one hand, you have a group of people, a minority in a generally white and Christian culture, who want a seat at the table. But on the other, you have the same minority wanting to assert its uniqueness, to celebrate its own strength, to remind fellow Americans that they are part of a diaspora that has often experienced rejection. This is why those serious tensions have existed in other areas of their relationship. Many Jews and Blacks actually find a kinship. The horrors of the Holocaust and 400 years of slavery are bonds, as are racism, bigotry, and anti-Semitism, to name just a few. Now, in light of the recent prominence of the Black Lives Matter movement, especially here in America, Kwanzaa has taken on even more significance and importance. Dr. Milana Karegna, now 84 years young, is an American professor of African American studies, an activist, and an author who created Kwanzaa in 1966 during the aftermath of the Watts riots as a specifically African American holiday. So, unlike the other holidays that we've explored today, this holiday was created and it's contemporary as well as spiritual rather than specifically religious. Karenga's goal was to give Blacks an alternative to the existing holidays and give Blacks an opportunity to celebrate themselves and their history rather than simply imitate the practice of the dominant society. For Karenga, the creation of such holidays underscored the essential premise that you must have cultural revolution that gives identity, purpose, and direction. So Kwanzaa is a celebration of African American culture that's held from December 26th to January 1st, culminating in gift giving and a feast of faith called Karamu Ya Imani. Although Kwanzaa is primarily an African American holiday, it has also come to be celebrated outside the United States, particularly in Caribbean and other countries where there are large numbers of descendants of Africans. The name Kwanzaa derives from the Swahili phrase Matunda ya Kwanzaa, meaning first fruits of the harvest. Karegna was inspired by the first fruits festivals of the Zulu tribes in South Africa. Now, the holiday is spelled with an additional A, Kwanzaa, it's two A's at the end, so that it would have a symbolic 7 letters. 7 is a special number among many native African tribes, and as a result, most aspects of Kwanzaa, including the very name, revolve around the number 7. Kwanzaa celebrates what anthropologists and historians see as the 7 principles of African heritage. Each one of the 7 days of Kwanzaa is dedicated to one of the following principles: umoja, unity, to strive for and maintain unity in the family, community, nation, and race. Koji jagulia, self-determination, to define ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves. Ujima, collective work and responsibility, to build and maintain our community together and make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems and solve them together. The number 4 principle is Ujama, cooperative economics, to build and maintain our own stores, shops, and other businesses, and to profit from them together. Naya, purpose, to make our collective vocation the building and developing of our community in order to restore our people to their traditional greatness. Kumba, creativity, to always do as much as we can, in the way we can, in order to leave our community more beautiful and beneficial than we inherited it. And finally, there is Imani, faith, to believe with all our heart in our people, our parents, our teachers, our leaders, and the righteousness and victory of our struggle. Kwanzaa also has 7 core symbols. Mazal, crops. Mazal symbolizes the fruits of collective planning and work, and the resulting joy, sharing, unity, and thanksgiving part of African harvest festivals. To demonstrate Mazal, people place nuts, fruits, vegetables representing work on the makeka, which is the placemat. So just as the crops stand on the makeka, the present day stands on the past. The makeka symbolizes the historical and traditional foundation for people to stand on and build their lives. Muhindi, the ear of corn. The stalk of corn represents fertility and the idea that through children, the future hopes of the family are brought to life. 1 ear of corn is placed on the mat for every child in a family celebration. Mishuma Saba, the 7 candles. Just as during the 8 days of Hanukkah and during the 4 weeks of pre-Christmas Advent season in Christianity, candles, light, are an important aspect of Kwanzaa. The 7 Kwanzaa candles are ceremonial objects that serve to symbolically recreate the sun's power, as well as to provide light. On the kinara, there is 1 black candle representing the people, 3 red candles representing the struggle, and 3 green candles that represent the future that comes from that struggle. The kinara is the candle holder, and the kinara represents our ancestry, the original stalk from which we came. The unity cup is something that is celebrated on the 6th day of Kwanzaa. The libation ritual is performed in honor of the ancestors. Every family member and guest will take a drink together as a sign of unity and remembrance. And finally, zawadi, gifts. On the 7th day of Kwanzaa, gifts are given, often during or after a feast, to encourage growth, achievement, and success. Handmade gifts are encouraged to promote self-determination, purpose, and creativity. So there you are. A little background about 4 holidays that are celebrated by untold millions of people in America and millions more around the world. By unwrapping some of the history behind these celebrations, my hope is that we'll come to further appreciate the rich diversity that we find not only in America, but in the world around us. Again, for more information about today's program, please visit my website, makingwings.net, and take that deeper dive number 50. And now, before we talk about our next program, I'd like to thank you for being here. And it is definitely time for your thoughts and ideas.
All right, I'm going to put the link to the survey in the chat again for folks. And I will also email that out along with the upcoming programs that I mentioned. I'm going to scroll back here because we've got some questions in the chat. Someone asked about the pronunciation. Is it pronounced Celtic or Celtic?
Interestingly enough, that is an argument. Most people will say Celtic, where Celtic comes from, that disparagency, it actually comes from the Latin root for the name of that group of people. And there is still an argument when you learn Latin, for those of us who learned Latin, whether it's a hard C sound or a soft C sound. So take your pick. I say Celtic. But yet, when you think of like the Boston Celtics, everybody uses the soft S sound. So one is neither right nor wrong.
Let's see. Someone asks if Mithra is Hindu.
In when we talk about Kwanzaa, are they talking about that? I'm not sure.
No, I think it was during the winter solstice section.
Oh yes, the winter solstice section. Yes, okay. Yeah, the word Mithra, yes, you will find that, I believe, in Sanskrit, but no, it's not related. It's a separate thing.
Let's see. Um, Someone else says, I thought cardinals wore the red. I think that was when you were talking about Santa
Saint Nicholas.
Claus. Yeah.
Saint Nicholas. No, bishops can also wear red. Cardinals wear red. But remember that a cardinal is basically an elevated bishop. There's bishop, there's archbishop, there's cardinal, and they all can wear various forms of red. And remember, we're now talking about a tradition, uh, you know, close to 2,000 years old. So again, clothing differences might be a little bit different there. In the same way that now the Pope wears white, for example.
Someone else asked, why do they light candles at Kwanzaa?
Well, again, this idea of which we spoke about also when we spoke about Hanukkah. And for those of you who are Christian, you may know, and who are worshipers in church, you know that during the 4 weeks of Advent, you light candles in, an Advent candle in church. Uh, this goes back to literally to winter solstice celebrations, of the idea of, light in the middle of darkness. Now, in the darkness of winter. But in terms of Kwanzaa, it is just, again, it's a tradition to light a candle representing some of these seven great attributes of the season. But it has to do with light, shedding light in the world. It's a symbol.
Let's see. Someone else asked about being able to see more of your lectures. And as we mentioned, he will be back with us on February 25th at 6:30 for African American Space Explorers.
There
And
it
I will
is.
send out the link to that registration along with the programs that I mentioned earlier. He'll also be here on March 12th at 6:30 for the Audacious Adventures of Nellie Bly. And I can send that link as well. But I believe on your website you have a listing of other uh, lectures that you are doing.
Yes, I do. There's a section that you can pick a page in the drop down called Library Schedule, and there it lists the many libraries that I speak at across the country, and specifically the topics that I'll be speaking about on specific days. So you'll find the Mid-Continent Public Library mentioned there and upcoming things. And also then other libraries in New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Oregon. I'm all over the place. And by the way, I will also say that in terms of we have a feast in March. On the 12th, I'm talking about Nellie Bly, and just a few days later, on the 16th, we'll be talking about Eleanor Roosevelt. So I hope you don't get too tired of me twice in 1 month.
Yeah. Now I will say that the Eleanor Roosevelt one is not published to our website yet, where people can register.
Hmm.
Um, so by the time we get to the February program, it'll be live on the website, and I can get people that link at that time.
Great. And you should all now be seeing on your screen the African American Space Explorers. And as we said, that is going to be on February 25th. But in the meantime, before we close out, are there any more comments or thoughts that we can see in the chat? Hope I answered the few questions adequately for you guys.
Someone else asked if the black candle is used to light the others.
Yes, it's lit first and then it's used to light the others. That's my understanding. In much the same way that the central candle of the menorah lights the other candles.
Um,
And if I'm not mistaken, again, for those of you who practice Christianity, if you go attend a church, the Advent candles, there is usually a central candle that lights the other four candles because each of the Advent candles represents a specific theme or an idea leading up to Christmas. So it's the same thing. So there's in many traditions, there is this idea of there's a central candle and then the others are lit from it.
yeah. So yeah, someone asked again about the website. So if you're on the website on the main page, there's a hamburger menu in the
Hmm.
upper left. And if you
Yes,
click on that, one of the choices is lecture schedule.
correct. As well as other things, including all these deeper dives like tonight's for number 50 if you want to explore more because we can only say so much in 60, 70 minutes. So
Yeah.
if you want to really swim into this into any of these four holidays, be my guest.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Thierfelder, and
Oh,
thank you everybody for coming this evening. Um, and have a happy holidays, everyone,
absolutely. Absolutely.
regardless of how you choose to celebrate.
Yeah.
We've covered all the options.
I've given you choices and it's it's well, I hope you find one that fits you. And I would like to thank again the Mid-Continent Public Library for inviting me to give these presentations. It means a lot to me. And I will see you in the new year. Happy holidays, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good night.